Hello guys, and in today's video, I want to upload something different than art, something way cooler in my opinion. And in this video, I want to upload how to show you how to play chess. So chess is a very brilliant game that requires skill and patience in order to win. Um, and chess is like a really great game, great game that has been going on for thousands of years. First called as chaturanga or something. It was invented in India, and now I wanted to show you how to play it yourself if you ever wanted to. So I'm using a website called Lychess. It's a brilliant website. It helps you like play chess. You can watch some tournaments in there, and it's a brilliant website that I use to play with my friends, play with the computer, to test me. Yeah, so it's a great website. You can also have some puzzles to crack and everything like how can you do checkmate and everything like that. So chess is a brilliant game that I think pretty much everybody should learn how to play, in my opinion. So I'm going to teach you the basic rules of chess. So here they are. There are um, six different types of pieces: the king, queen, rook, bishop, knight, and pawn. And so these are like the six different pieces that you will use in a chessboard. So if you probably have a physical chessboard, then the king will probably look like something with a cross on the top, and it's like about as tall as the queen, which is also it's like the two tallest pieces are probably the queen and the king. The one that probably has a cross on the top is the king, and the other one in the end should be queen. Then there's the rooks, which kind of look like castles if you really look at them, or like towers, whatever. There's the bishop, which is basically like the advisor of the king and queen. And then there's the knight, which has a really cool moving formation. And then there's the pawn, which are like the starting soldiers. So we're gonna learn about the pawns first. And so even before we do that, let me actually show you how to set up the board. So starting position. So this is actually a starting position in an official chess game. And always remember that white moves first. Um, and let me just show you how it's set up. So right now it's just set up, and all the 8 pawns that you get are in the front row, and then the 2 rooks are in the corners, and then the knights come right next to them, and then the bishops come right next to those, and then the king and queen come in the 2 center squares. Now what's confusing is that which way should they go? So let me explain this as simply as possible. The queen always goes on her color. So that means that if it's a white queen, she will go on the in the white square in the 2 center squares, and then the king will go in the remaining square. So as you can see on the other side for black, the queen is on the black square because she's black, like it's like the black color. And so that's like how the pieces are set up. It's really simple. You can think of the bishops again as like the king and queen's advisors, knight as like the horses that the king and queen ride on, maybe. The rooks as like the guarding castles or like the fortress, and then the pawns are like the soldiers, basically. So how do all these pieces work exactly? Let me show you. So I'm going to delete all of this, and I'm just going to bring up a pawn right here. So the pawn, I'm just going to, so I'm going to give it to you from white's perspective. The pawn moves 1 square always, like 2 squares on its first turn, basically. So on this first move, the pawn can move here. But then after that, it can only move 1 square, 1 square, 1 square, 1 square, 1 square. So what happens if the pawn reaches the end without being captured? So what happens is that the pawn can turn into either of these 4 pieces: a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. So that those are like the stronger pieces. So basically, I would suggest that if you are able to make it all the way, make it into a queen. It's because queen have the most values, and they can move around the board really quickly, and it's great to have queens. So the pawns on their first turn, they can move 2 squares. How does a pawn capture? Let's say if there's a rook right here. And then let's say if the pawn only wants to move 1 square on its first turn, then if it moves right here, and let's say, and then white makes, like, puts the queen right there, then this pawn can capture this rook, moving diagonally. So the reason why that pawns so like pawns, they basically capture diagonally. To do not capture straight. So let's say if there was a queen here, the pawn wouldn't capture like this. So it would instead capture diagonally. So that's how you move a pawn. And so remember, pawn capture diagonally but move straight, and just keep that in mind. And that's how a pawn moves around the board. And I'm gonna delete all the pawns. Okay, so then how do you move the next piece? That's the knight. So the knight is a very difficult thing to understand, but I'm sure that after a little bit of practice, you'll probably get it. So the way that a knight moves is quite weird, but also pretty cool. So let me bring a knight here, and then the knights that go on here and here. Okay, so these are the knights, and knight move in a cool L shape. So if these all, like, the squares in front of them were free, they would move like this, right? Or like this. And those are like the only 2 available squares for the knight. But when you like put them near like these 4 like center squares, this area, so like this, like this area, so you see that area, so that's their, like, probably, like, that's where they're at their most, because that's when they have the accessibility to most squares. They can move right here, right? They can move right here, move right here, right there, right there, right there, right there, and right there. So how does a knight move exactly? So they move in that L shape. So like 2 squares and then 1 square. So like that. And like the same thing for the knight. So that's how a knight really moves. The cool thing about knights is that they can jump over other pieces. So let's say there was a bishop here, king over here, a knight over here. Let's say the king was actually let's put the king back, and let's say there was a queen right here. So the knight, like other pieces, they can't really jump over other pieces. They can just like take their square. But the knight, this knight can actually move through these squares and then land on that square and capture the queen. Now, that doesn't mean that the knight will also capture these 2 pieces if they're of the own color or not, because they will just capture the piece that they land on. So that's how a knight moves really, and I'm gonna delete all of this. Now, let's study about the bishop. The bishop is pretty easy to understand. The bishops are right here, and right here, right here, and right here. So actually, no, wait, yeah, there we go. So the bishops, they move in diagonally. So the bishop, if all these squares like this diagonally were free, then the bishop could move all the way here, and then this bishop could move all the way here. This bishop could move all the way here, and then this bishop could move all the way here. So the bishop basically moves in an X shape. Not really an X shape, but like diagonally. So the thing about bishops is that they can only go to squares that are half of the board. So there are 64 squares total on this board, and the bishop can only go on 32 of them. Want to know why? It's because bishops can only stay on the color that they are on right now. So this bishop is on a dark square, so it can only stay on the dark square, because if it keeps moving diagonally anywhere, then it will still stay on the dark squares. And then the same thing for this white bishop, and then like for those 2, right? They will only stay on the square that they start off with. So that's how a bishop moves. And so how the bishops capture is pretty simple. If let's say there was a queen right here, then the bishop would just move and capture it. if there was a rook right over here, the bishop, um, and like this, and then the bishop would just move and capture it. Now, the thing is that the bishops, like, they can't move over other pieces, unlike the knight. So that's it for the bishop. Now let's learn about the rooks, which are very simple pieces to understand. So here's how the bishops move, the rooks move. So they're in the four corners of the board, right here, right here, right here, right. Okay, great. So the rooks, they move quite simply. They just move in a straight line as far as they can go without like a piece coming in between. So if there was, let's say, a queen here, then the bishop cannot go all the way like here or something. They can only go to the queen all the way, or they could go any of these. They could like go to only these three squares. So that's like how a rook moves, and like they will capture like this, and then they just like move into a straight line. So the rooks, they can they're like pretty deadly in these four center squares. Um so in these four, that's where a rook is very deadly, right? So it just moves like that. So in these four center squares, the rook can move like this, like that, like that, like that. And that's like how a rook moves. So that's it for the rook. Now let's move on to the next piece. Okay, so the next piece that we're gonna learn about is the queen. The queen is a very powerful piece and the most powerful on the board. So the queen is gonna be over here and over here. So the queens, they can move pretty much as a rook and bishop combined. So the queen could move diagonally or straight in some way, right? So that's how a queen moves. Again, they cannot jump over other pieces like the knight, and they move pretty much as the same as like a rook or bishop. And the queen is like a very simple piece, very powerful. And that's like how a queen moves. So that's it for queen. Now let's learn about the most important piece of all. So there's a difference between important and powerful. Powerful means that you're really strong. You have like you can do pretty much anything. Importance means that you're pretty much priceless, and if you lose or something, then you're like, it's not good. So the kings, again, they're going to be right here and right here. So the king, they can move pretty much one square in any direction. So if the king was, let's say, here, the king could move right here, right there, 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 and right there. So that's how like the king would move. Right, in like the squares surrounding them. The thing about kings is, like, let's say if there was a queen right over here, okay? So the king, he cannot move to these three squares. Do you know why? Because otherwise he would fall into check, which is a term I'm going to explain later. So that means that the queen could go and capture the king, and then white loses. So the king cannot move there. Otherwise, it would be called as an illegal move. And that's it for the king. So now we're done reviewing the pieces. Now let's learn about their worth. So I'm going to delete everything here on this board. And I'm going to, again, start off with the king. So king is equal to something called infinite points. All right. So infinite points means that he is like, the number that he's worth just keeps on going and going. It never ends because he's worth infinity. It's because if you lose them, you lose the game. So it's important to protect the king. That's why they're priceless and they're worth infinity. So that's what a king is worth. And generally, people, they like to think about these pieces worth on pawns, because a pawn is worth, let's say, like 1 point. So they like to convert the pawn's worth into this. So the queen is worth 9 points, which is more than any other piece on the board. So the queen, the reason why she's worth 9 points is because she can move like 2 pieces, the rook and bishop combined. That's why she's worth 9 points. Now then, there's the rook, right? Which is worth 5 points, because it can move straight pretty fast and it can move around the board pretty fast. The bishop is also worth 3 points, a little bit less than the rook. And the thing about the bishop is that it can only move on one part of on one part of the square. So they can only move on 32 squares, which is only half the board. Then there's the knight. That is also worth 3 points because it can't get to all. I mean, it can move theoretically to all the pieces on the board, like all the squares on the board, but it would take really long to do that, unlike a rook or the queen. So that's why they're generally also about 3 points, because they're worth about the same as a bishop. And then there's the pawn, which is worth 1 point. Pawns are really not much worth in they're near their starting position. So they're usually worth when they're in this area, like in the 7th or 8th or maybe 6th row. So in the 6th to 8th row, that's when they're the most important and the most valuable. So that's how much the pieces are worth. Now remember, this is not a certain rule of the game. This is what grandmasters, which are professional chess players, have decided throughout the centuries and years. And yeah, that's pretty much the basics of chess. And let's just get that board set up. Starting position. Okay, great. So right here, remember, so a good let's actually start off with Checkmate, which is board editor. Okay, great. So let's talk about Checkmate and check. So checkmate and check are basically attacking the king, basically. So let's say if there was a white king right here, let's say a queen right here, and then a rook right here. So now there's this king that is trapped in the lonely corner. So the king, let's say, moves here. Then the queen moves right here, restricting the king to go into this 6th row, right? So that's why the king can't go into the 6th row. So the queen is restricting his movement. The king can either keep on moving around in the 7th row or go back to the 8th row. So let's say if he decides to stick around for a bit, then this rook can move right here. And again, now this rook is taking away even more squares for the king to move to. So now the king can only move to these 3 squares behind him. So let's say that he moves right here, close to these 2 pieces, looking if he can capture them. Then the queen goes in for the killer move, which is checkmate. So the reason why this is checkmate is because the king has these 6 squares surrounding him, right? The king cannot move right here because otherwise the queen will kill. The king cannot move right here because the rook will kill. Cannot move right here. Again, rook will kill. Cannot move right here. Rook will kill. And then cannot move right here. Queen will kill. So the queen and king are doing very important jobs here. They're covering up these 2 rows that the king can move to. And right now the king is in check, and that's why the king's dead and black wins the game. So that's an example of the checkmate. There are very cool checkmates in all sorts of different ways, but this is just one of the common checkmates used mostly by players when it's nearly the end of the game. And that's when the king is pretty much cornered and doesn't have a lot of other pieces on the board. So let's clear it up. And now I want to show you something called stalemate. So stalemate is something like this. King is right here. here, and then okay. So this is an example of stalemate. The king is right here trapped, right? So the king is not currently in check because this queen is not attacking the king in any way, but the king has no legal moves. They cannot move right here because queen will capture, and cannot move here or here because queen controls the 7th row, right? So the queen controls G8 and the 7th row. The king is not in check, so that's why this game is called draw. This is called stalemate. So you want to be careful in this, because what happens is that sometimes players have like the proper material to win the game, but then they do this wrong move, and then the game ends up in the draw. And then the person who's pretty much about to lose size and relief, which is not good for you. So you always want to make sure to give the king some space, but very little space, just space to move like 1 or 2 squares, but otherwise no more than that. So you always want to corner the king, but not corner too much that he cannot move anywhere, and then the game ends in stalemate. So that's called stalemate. This is a very popular example of what happens in games, and you probably don't want this to happen to you if you're white. So let's clear it up again. And that's called stalemate. And I showed you checkmate. Then there's also called check, which is a little bit different than checkmate. It's when let's say if the queen is right over here, then the queen, and there's like a king right here. So the queen moves diagonally, and then she checks the king. Now the king, this is not checkmate because the queen is just attacking, right? But the king can move to either of these 3 squares, and then he's not in check. So that's called check. And then so that's called check. Now checkmate is different. That's when you have another piece right over here, let's say, and that's when the king can't move anywhere. And the rules of checkmate are very simple. There are only 3 ways that you can get out of checkmate: capture the checking piece, put a piece in between the checking piece and the king, or move your king. Wait, no, sorry. Yeah, so those 2 are probably like most common. Like probably like move your king out of the way, but that's not possible. Like move your king out of the way, put a piece in between, or capture the checking piece. Those 3 are the most common. Like that's how you probably like get yourself out of check or checkmate. But if it's checkmate, then you win. But that's like the basic thing in checkmate and check and stalemate. So let's go back and clear everything again. And then there's another thing called draw. There's several different ways of draw. The most common one is if like both players know that there's insufficient material to win. For example, this like let me give you an example. So there's 2 kings, remember, in the game, and then these 2 knights. Now the thing is that king and knight cannot ever deliver checkmate together. So, and neither can the black side deliver checkmate, because again they have the same, because it's not enough worth. So that's why this is a draw because of insufficient material. There's another kind of draw which is called which is where both players just like say that, do you want to draw because I think this game's getting boring and whatnot. So that's another type of draw where let's say a player says this game is getting quite hard for both of us. It's very hard for either of us to win. For example, in this situation, right, let's say it's like this. So in this situation, it is very hard for either of these 2 sides to win. It is because they cannot at all win, mainly because they both have a lot of material, and either of them can deliver checkmate, but then the other rook can also attack, and then this king can also attack. That's another reason why they probably big draw. So those are like the basic things in chess to learn. And now let me share this website, this amazing website that I found. This is called Lyches. So Lyches is pretty simple to use. You go to lichess.org, and then you over here you can see some stuff. You can play with a friend, right? And we're in a standard or crazy house, racing kings, like all those cool things. And then there's time control where you can add a chess clocks or unlimited. So I like to add real time because otherwise it takes too long. So you can like add minutes per side, increment in seconds. You can do all of that. You can pick what side you want to be. So let's say if I click white, if I want to be white in this game, and then it says challenge to a game. So then you copy like this link for the game, and then you send it to the person that you want to face. And then once they get that link through something, then they like click on that link and then they join the game. So remember, it says that the first person to come to this URL. So remember, if you send it to several people, you might not know who's going to be your opponent because all of them are trying to click it at the same time. So if let's say two people click on the link, but one person clicked it before, then the person that clicked it before is the opponent of the sender, of the link sender, and then the other person that clicked on the link too late, then that person is a spectator. They're just watching the game. They're doing nothing. They're just watching the game. They're not in control of the pieces or anything. And so there's a website called Lyches. I'll add it in the description below. And you can play with a friend. You can play with a computer. And in this, you can like choose what sort of level you want your computer to be. Level 8, which is probably the highest, which is probably like expert level, grandmaster. 7 is very good. 6 also like okay, very good. 5 medium, your average chess player. 4 also about medium. 3 just beginning to like start. 2 about the same, and then 1 doesn't know a lot about chess. So this website is called Lyches, and you can like play with the computer and stuff. You can watch some of these games right now that's happening. And this is an amazing website to use. You can also learn tools. You can do board editor, which is what I was doing to show you these moves and everything. And thank you for watching this video. Please stay tuned for Ping Pong Pow, and bye.